This program is being brought to you by the Columbus 500 Foundation. We dedicate this program to all the immigrants and their descendants who have shared our experiences.
I was almost 8. I remember going to Ellis Island and the Statue of Liberty and landing in Bristol. The first thing I saw in Bristol was a Grundy clock, beautiful clock.
19 years old, just about enough to go to army. But Mussolini was looking for me. So I said, well, if you want to see me, you got to come to America now.
Everyday staple of Italian families that had to be the making of wine. And that has to be a ritual. It has to be a ritual. Everybody made it.
Welcome to Bristol Borough, Pennsylvania, a community of about 10,000 people located in southeastern Pennsylvania along the Delaware River between Philadelphia and Trenton. The citizens are proud of their town's historic past. Every year in mid-October, we celebrate Historic Bristol Day, commemorating the town's colonial origins. Many residents along Radcliffe Street open their historic homes to the public, some beautiful examples of late 18th and 19th century architecture. Here is where the mainly English descendants of the town's founders and the wealthy used to live. It remains the most exclusive part of town. At the end of August, we hold an Italian American Day organized by the town's men's clubs. It is the largest of our ethnic celebrations. This event is evidence of the town's ethnic and racial diversity and reminds us that Bristol's more recent history is also the history of minority groups who are not part of our colonial past.
And finally, we're here to celebrate families. We're here because so many families in the Bristol area contributed money towards this monument to have their names inscribed. And we're here so that we can show our children and grandchildren something about their lineage and their heritage, something for which we can all be proud.
In 1992, the Italian-American community organized to build a monument to Christopher Columbus on the 500th anniversary of his discovery of the Americas. Local artist Joseph Pavone was commissioned to create the monument. It stands not only as a symbol in our pride in Columbus's achievement, but is also a testimony of our legacy and unity as an ethnic group. At the same time, we decided to compile an oral and visual history of the Italian Americans of Bristol, a history that Dorn Green had only touched upon in his History of Bristol, a history that would soon be forgotten with the passing of the few remaining first-generation immigrants. We interviewed Giovanna Baiocchi, Armando Petrizzi, Anna Vergulti, Natalina Costantini, Silvio Ciotti, Henry Perotti, Father John Di Matteo, Angelina Cobb, and Ernesto Pezza. We also gathered background information from Josephine Grimaldi. We then interviewed members of succeeding generations who still had a recollection of the first generation and how they lived. In the process of recording their memories and experiences, we were prompted to examine not only who we were, but also who we had become. Would the sense and substance of our ethnicity survive as long as the stone and concrete monument in Lions Park? Or would we eventually be absorbed into the melting pot of history that seems to have claimed the identity of other ethnic groups before us? When did we begin coming to these shores, and why? The story of the Italian Americans of Bristol begins with the unprecedented industrial expansion after the Civil War. According to Dorn Green, in his History of Bristol, In the year 1868, Joshua Pierce, who is considered Bristol's industrial pioneer, established the Livingston Mills in 1868, later to become Steele's Mills for the manufacture from wool of felt products. Industries followed throughout the remainder of the 19th and into the 20th centuries, such as the Leadham Carpet Mills in 1887, the Corona Leather Works in 1889, and the Standard Cast Iron Pipe and Foundry Works in 1890. The surviving wives of industrial laborers recall their husbands' work.
Dove lavorava zio?
On a boiler work. He was a mole on a boiler work.
No, when he came from Miller.
Beh, che la brutta job.
What did he do when he first came over here?
Oh, he would call over when he came. Then he got his regular job, weaver for a long time. Weaver the rug.
What's the name of the place where he was a weaver?
Leadham.
The Grundy family began the manufacture of worsted yarns in 1876. Joseph R. Grundy would later manage the mill. He would become a Republican state senator, the town's leading manufacturer, benefactor, and the object of controversy even today among Italian Americans. Joe Grundy would figure prominently in the political and economic fate of the Italian Americans of Bristol for generations to come. With the advent of the First World War, Bristol's boundaries eventually expanded into the Harriman section as the result of the establishment of the Merchant Shipbuilding Corporation. Work could also be found on the railroad, the Landreth Seed Company, and the Iredell and King's farms. So Bristol became one of the many industrial mill and manufacturing towns in the northeastern United States that would attract millions of European immigrants, economic refugees who were eager to satisfy the country's seemingly insatiable appetite for cheap labor. Some of the first Italians were skilled tradesmen, but most were of peasant stock, trying to escape the political anarchy and economic stagnation in their beautiful homeland after it had freed itself in 1860 from foreign domination. A great many were sharecroppers who were forced to pay their wealthy and titled landlords half of their agricultural yield annually, the infamous mezzadria, and they were expected to serve their masters like serfs.
Well, the owner of the house, anytime they want you, they call you, go get this, go get that, because we live in this house, you know. So one day he called me. I go through the city, from my house, 2 miles to go to the city, and then all through the city, another little village, they call Fonte Cambio. And I got to go get this regular prayer. Boy, we got to go home. It was late.
Later, others would come to escape the threat of military conscription.
My brother-in-law wrote to me and he said, Mussolini's looking for you. And I said, well, you'll have to come here.
Were friends of my grandfather, and they advised my grandfather to send his sons to America if he didn't want them, my grandfather, didn't want his sons to go back into the army.
However, the first Italian probably came to Bristol for economic reasons. One source claims that he was Frank Seneca, a cobbler who rented a house on Penn Street in the late 1870s. His descendants continued to live in Bristol. The census of 1880 indicates that 27 Italians resided in Bristol. 20 years later, the number had grown to 386. In 1910, their numbers reached 1,901. By 1920, more than 3,000 Italian Americans lived in Bristol, constituting more than 1/3 of the population. Little wonder that Bristol became known as Little Italy. In 1960, both the total number and percentage of Italian Americans decreased as many moved elsewhere. But 30 years later, the population of Italian Americans of single or mixed ancestry increased significantly as the children and grandchildren of the first generation Italian Americans started families of their own, and others moved back to Bristol. But not all of the immigrant Italians stayed in America.
I was born in August 1919. Then my father went back to Italy because he had ties in Italy. He had his mother and his family there. Plus, frankly, I don't think that he missed Italy a lot and he wanted to go back. So he told my mother he had to go back because his mother was there and she was not well and so on. But he went back, and and my mother was left here expecting me.
As in Italy, they were encouraged to marry young, and they had large families, averaging 8 persons. One woman, whose husband was out of work, boasted of having 20 children. They came from various regions of Italy, but mostly from the area south of Rome, the so-called Mezzogiorno.
They came mostly from Abruzzi, Campobasso, then from Le Marche, and then I think half of the town came from Sicily, in Calabria.
In the neighborhoods, they congregated into regional groups, marrying into their own kind.
In the beginning, the Sicilian would marry a Sicilian. A guy from Naples would, it seemed at first, and really early in, they married maybe somebody that they knew back in the old country, or lots of times, I'll tell you what would happen. If two wanted one another, they would write to the folks in Italy, how's Joe Cotone, or how's Joe Bono, or whatever.
In 1900, many Italians lived on Penn and Cedar Streets. In 1910, the census indicates that a sizable number of single Italian men lived at the Penn Railroad camp, where reportedly they slept on straw beds in boxcars. By 1920, the heaviest concentration made their homes on Lincoln Avenue.
All Lincoln Avenue, that was Little Italy. That's what it was.
Did they come from a
People kept boarders, and houses are full of. My mother kept boarders. Even after we moved, years later, we moved to Jefferson Avenue. My mother kept up to 20 boarders in the house. We had a big house, so we kept boarders.
Eventually, some saved enough money to move into new brick row homes built by Angelo Dorenzo.
All Pandan they're all red brick houses, and they were all built by Angelo Dorenzo.
And still standing are these homes of simple, sturdy, and practical design with large and spacious porches extending the lives of their families into the streets, reflecting the character of the people.
Many of them worked on projects under Angelo Dorenzo, who was my grandmother's uncle, and he brought many of his families from the town of Rocco Vivar and Abruzzi. They came over. They were craftsmen. They were stonemasons and carpenters, and they did a lot of work for Mr. Grundy.
Dorenzo was destined to become Bristol's wealthiest and most prominent Italian-American after the turn of the century. What kind of people were they?
But they were wonderful people. They had a good moral character.
But
they came over with the moral code because they came from the little towns where people were very religious, attached to their church.
True, there were those who were accused of crimes like stealing chickens, but records indicate that the bad were exceedingly few. A commentator in the Bucks County Gazette in 1906 admits, "Many unkind remarks are made about our Italian neighbors, but one thing is certain, they're honest, hardworking, frugal people." Whatever their virtues, they faced a blind discrimination from both their Irish and white Anglo-Saxon Protestant neighbors.
I can remember my grandmother's story about they had gotten here, I guess, before St. Anne's Church was built, which was I think 1926 when the final church was built.
They had to go to St. Mark's.
And they had to go to St. Mark's, and they had to walk. As she said, they walked down the street with little knives under their cloaks because the Irish would just badger them as they walked along. Now, of course, we really didn't experience anything like that.
In the early days,
Mostly on the street departments, there was.
you had the labor work, right? The
Yeah,
labor work.
the labor work was.
You got them.
The backbreaking.
The minorities
work,
got
They
that.
always knew where to go. And
For the backbreaking
the
jobs.
Italian people had there was no problem there of finding work, but the jobs in City Hall and things like that. I suppose we can't prove it. Possibly there was some discrimination.
I'll tell you when the Irish and the Italians got together, I think you would like to hear that, wouldn't you?
Famous story we haven't heard yet.
Okay. The Ku Klux Klan decided to parade on New Buckley Street. And you can imagine, you know what they stand for. The Italians and the Irish got together. They beat them up. They drove them out of town. And that's how they became really friends.
There are those today who still feel the sting of ethnic bias.
Today, 1993, it's a problem because those prejudices against Italians still surface. And it strikes me, it hurts me when that happens because it shouldn't be after all these years. But it's still there. It surfaces and you still hear comments like guineas and wops and those Italians from Bristol. And in my profession, there are a few people in my background, and it hurts particularly when you hear it from colleagues, if they slip or whatever. But for anyone to think it's not there today, it's still there.
I think I sensed more of it when I left Bristol and went to high school out of town. When I went to Bishop Egan, all of a sudden you had all of Levittown and Morrisville, and then I sensed it, even from some of the faculty, the Italians from Bristol, and often done in a jovial way, but sometimes you can see through the humor, and you know that there's a biting edge there.
Mafia type. You hear an Italian and you think, oh, he's in the rackets or he's part of the mafia. And I really, I take offense to that anymore. It's all, you know, just last night on TV, there was another story about a mafia marriage or something ridiculous like that. And it's, as Bill said, it's, they come across as not being articulate. It's D's and do's, and that's something I really am tired looking at. I really am.
Perhaps this bias was also reflected in the unusually large ratio of aliens compared to naturalized citizens. Some immigration judges refused citizenship to those Italian Americans who they thought had not served in World War I, who had not bought a war bond despite having made $65 a week working at the Merchant Shipbuilding Corporation. One of the judges is reported to have shouted more than once, "You must be 100% American."
My mother wanted to become an American citizen, so she had to learn all the rules, right? And so when she got there, she made a mistake, and the judge, or whoever it was, said she couldn't become an American citizen. So she said, "That's okay with me. You give me my 2 boys back from the army, and I'll go back to Italy. I live like a queen in Italy. Over here, I got to work from morning to night." She became American citizen.
She paid her dues.
Yeah, she said she would.
Although many first-generation Italian Americans soon learned to speak English, however imperfectly, the literacy rate was not high, but improving during the period between 1900 and 1920. And those who were literate in Italian normally had only an elementary school education. Compulsory education in Italy was only enforced during the 1950s.
So some people that didn't know how to write and read, they didn't know the language so good. And I was working for the judge, a man came, he had about 20 traffic lights, he never bothered paying. So they had him subpoenaed, they had a pier over there. So the judge was real angry, said it to be paid in full by July the 1st, but he didn't say that to be paid in full. He said to be executed by July the 1st. They meant to say pay in full. He understood to be electrocuted. And he got so scared, he got up, he said, "Your Honor," and my goodness, I fainted.
When I started in the 9th grade, it was a large 9th grade class. But by the time we graduated, there was only 90 kids in the whole graduating class. And I think there was about over 200 or 300 that started in the 9th grade.
My father always encouraged us to go to school. I graduated high school. My 2 brothers graduated high school, plus they went to Westchester University. And I have a son who's an attorney, someone else who's an electrician, secretary. Education was always encouraged. I know it wasn't always so, but my father came over in 22, and that was his main goal, never to let anybody work in the store.
For those who could read Italian, they even published an Italian newspaper in town.
There was a weekly called The Workman's Guide, La Guida Operaia. It was published by a one-man shop. That's Mr. Guido Merlo. Guido Merlo, he was a printer, and he sent me to the linotype school to learn linotyping. He bought a linotype machine, and that's my first job was studying Italian language. Now working at the Italian language made me a little more fluent with the Italian.
Their children, however, showed steady progress in completing elementary school between 1910 and 1920, but virtually none during this period attended high school. Since most were poor, the top priority of the family was work. Some children even attended school while they worked in the mills.
They used to work 10 hours, and you weren't allowed because it was child labor. You went to work at 6:30 in the morning. Now, the whistle would blow 6:30. Then it would blow 20 minutes to 7, and then 7:15 you had to be in the building to work. And it was a 10-hour day job. You worked 8, and 2 hours you went to school in the building. But the school wasn't anything. I didn't learn anything in the school they had there. And after your 2 hours, you went back to your position wherever you worked, and you finished the day till 5:30.
If they did attend school, they went to either the public school or St. Mark's School. Later they went to St. Anne's School and were sometimes taught by Italian nuns in broken English.
The school was 1924. The sisters came in 1922. And the school was built after 1925, the present building. The doors of the church, the school were donated by Joe Grandi, and he was there for the dedication of the school.
Perhaps my views of justice today are shaped a little bit by what I experienced then. One of the things, it was a very authoritarian environment, but it never seemed oppressive. And that may sound like a contradiction, but it wasn't. And I was an altar boy. And if you missed a Mass for any reason, you had a trial. Sister Agatha was in charge of the altar boys. And you had a small trial, and then you were given a consequence, and then life went on. And I remember, I hadn't missed Mass, but I was present at the trial, all the altar boys would be. And this poor guy who missed a Mass had just been found guilty of not having a good excuse to miss. And Father Peter stuck his head in the door, and in his very jovial way said, "Sister, it's such a beautiful day. Let the boys go." And she smiled and said, "We will, Father." And he walked away, and she said, "As soon as they serve their punishment."
And we always, our inside joke with family with something that may come up today. When she learned her alphabet, it was A, B, C, D, E, F, and G. And we had the hardest time. I know it's that. No, this isn't what it is. She's, no, Sister Anna told me. That's how you say it, F, and G.
There.
They worked long hours under difficult conditions for low wages, even by the standards of those days.
Well, I worked in the garage up here right in Tullytown for about a couple of months. Then I could see it. There wasn't no work. You let me go. Then from there, I went to the railroad. Worked for pick and shovel. Boy, my back, it hurt me. Then I got laid off from there, and I went with my father. The Marsville gravel plant today.
And you worked like 5 days, and I think sometimes it was, when we first started, I think it was five and a half days. And that was a long day for anybody.
How much did you get paid?
My first pay there was $8.87.
Was that a lot of money then, or was it normal wages?
Well, I would say I don't know whether it was normal or it was the wages that they made up, because there was no union or anything that they would say this is the union wage or this is the minimum wages. There was no such thing at that time. And if you you just wanted a job, and if you worked and you got $8.87, that was great.
Better paying jobs became available at the Merchant Shipbuilding Corporation during World War I.
Shabia?
Yeah, what kind of work?
Labor. Oh, labor. I used to hop with a gang. The gang was smashed hot rivets on a boat. I used to be in the scaffold with a bucket and catch it. Hey, you want to see something? Figure this bone. Figure this bone, eh?
You can see it.
One of the rivets, the way I went catch it, the bone's on my finger. I was 14 years. Hey, Vince, I used to make $45 a week now. I was only 14 years old. Well, it was good money them years.
As in Italy, the family was the central interdependent socioeconomic unit organized for survival. Everyone in the family was expected to contribute.
Did about a year in the Grundy Mills, and $15 a week I had to set rails, and I worked.
What'd you
The
do with
hardest
that
work.
money?
I turned it in.
Turned it in, right?
You better believe
We
it.
all turned it in.
I recall, now you bring that up, my father, the first couple of pays there, and he gave me $4. I thought that was great, you know.
Yeah,
Then the next week come, I said, boy, I'm going to get $5 more. So I turned to pay, and I'm waiting. He says, what'd you do with the $5 I gave you last week? I took care of that.
That's supposed to last you a month.
What'd you do with the $5 I gave you last week, you know?
My first job, I worked in the top.
But if you wanted a job, it was important to be a Republican and politically connected to the Grundy machine. There are those who resent Grundy and his tactics. Others say that he was simply practicing power politics and that he did a lot for the town.
But if you wanted to work and if you wanted a job, you had to be Republican.
Grundy did a lot for the town. At one time he had over 800 people, close to 900 people working that mill. Now some people say it was a sweatshop, you know, or kids worked there underage. That was a thing that was nationwide. They don't tell you this, see. And he helped a lot of families that people don't know anything about, like coal. Or he didn't force people to be a Republican, but some of his cohorts, men that worked for him, you know, put the pressure on some of the old Italians were Republicans only because of Grundy.
If they did not work in the factories or on the farms, they worked as family units in small businesses.
Rugged individualists, you would call them today. They were characters in
Characters.
their own right? And
Yep.
not using the term demeaning character, but they were colorful.
They were entrepreneurs in their own way, right? They made
Very
their own
good,
thing.
Woody, very good.
They were their own entrepreneurs.
I had a permanent job down at the Navy Yard because I was a veteran and I had an A1 plus rating. When I told my uncle, the one who I learned my trade with, he said, "You're out of your mind, quitting that job down in the Navy Yard. You're crazy." But I did. I quit and I went in business for myself.
Did you have to borrow money to get the business?
Yeah, I'll never forget that. I borrowed $600 from my cousin and I bought a broken down truck. It was one from the bakery truck, remember? It was really in bad shape, but I was pretty handy. I'm a welder and everything else, and I had some tools. I patched it up, and that's how I started.
There were shoe repairers, bakers, barbers, tailors, independent businessmen of all kinds. On almost every street where there was a group of Italian families, one could find a grocery store.
Yes, we did grow up in a very ethnic neighborhood. And as Pauline said, I think the neighbors felt very comfortable in coming into the store because Grandmom and Grandpop could speak Italian. And the women would come in and be able to communicate with them, and that was a very comfortable thing.
One of the last of the traditional family-run grocery stores in Bristol is Mazzanti's Market on Lincoln Avenue. The grandson of the founder continues to run the business. It's one of the few places that maintains the tradition of keeping credit records on small paper bags.
During the Depression time, you know, you go back and forth. During the Depression time, we never went hungry, and the kids always had shoes on their feet. And Matsandi, I guess your mother knows Matsandi, he fed a lot of hungry people.
There was never cash across the counter when Ann's father had the store, because there was no cash to begin with. Everything was marked on a book, and when they became fortunate enough to raise a few dollars, the first person to share in it was Mr. Franciscini, the grocery man. And there was never any tabs kept. It was just one of those things that you don't see today,
honest.
no question about it.
It was an
You just
honor
don't see
system.
it.
And most of them
really
paid.
was honorable. That people
Right.
were quite
Yeah.
honorable.
They brought with them the traditional way of life they had learned in the old world. They kept gardens, they made wine and sausage.
Everyday staple of Italian families that had to be the making of wine. And that has to be a ritual. That has to be a ritual.
Everybody made it.
Certain nights or certain days, each family got so many boxes of grapes from either Franciscini or Mazzandi, who sold it then. And he ground the grapes. The grapes were ground on that particular day at that family's home. They went through the whole ritual, the smashing of the grapes, the grinding, the squeezing, the pressing and everything. Then when that got through with one family, a couple days later, they all knew, and the same people got together, another house.
I remember, I remember being roughly 5, 6 years old when I remembered the fall vintage and the barrels in the cellar and the smell of the ripe grapes down underneath the front porch, and the little gnats flying around, and my uncle Sam Pica and my dad would be down crushing the grapes and talking about how good the wine was going to be this year, and those sights and those smells I could still recall in my head like a picture.
My grandfather, every once in a while, it wasn't a permanent thing, but it was more, I guess, a social occasion that he would decide to make sausage, and he would have the machine, and it would be a big production. They'd have to cut everything up, and of course everybody has their own formula for making sausage, what percentage of what, and that's a big deal.
In addition to these commonly shared traditions from the old world, they socialized, organized clubs, and sponsored entertainment.
Now we'll play one called La Sorella.
The Circolo Giuseppe Garibaldi and the Beneficial Society of Our Lady of Mount Carmel no longer exist, but several men's social clubs have survived. The St. Anne's Athletic Association organized young men into baseball and football teams. The club sponsored the boxing matches of the popular Maffo brothers after World War I. The Sons of Italy still hangs on with the smallest membership. However, the club with currently the largest membership is the Italian Mutual Aid Fifth Ward Club.
Our club was formed in 1907 by a group of Italian people who saw the need to form a group would protect one another. Not being able to speak English to a great extent, I believe it was 10, 12, 14 of them got together on a building on Lafayette Street. It's still there. And this is in 1907, and from there they progressed to where we are today, merger with the Fifth Ward Sporting Club, because the Fifth Ward Sporting Club had no visible means of support or income, and we thought we would merge with the old members of the Italian Mutual Aid, who were,
mostly parents.
Yeah, they were mostly our parents, and they were growing old, and the need just seemed to mold together. And from there, we feel that we're quite a successful Italian organization in the borough.
The clubs helped sponsor dances and melodramas presented in Italian, like The Two Sergeants, The Disgrace of the Poet, The Terrible Brigand, and Jennifer. They also sponsored opera. Beniamino Gigli, the great tenor and rival of Caruso, once performed in Bristol.
He came to town one time, and they had the Grand Theater, but the reception was very poor because he was singing opera, and the people at that time were an opera people, and it didn't go over very big.
More typically, however, the traditional and social lives of Bristol's Italian Americans revolved around the church. Most Italians were Catholic. At first they attended St. Mark's Church, which was of principally Irish American membership. As their numbers grew, Italians decided to build their own church. In 1908, the cornerstone was laid.
Well, at that time, the Italian language was very well spoken in church, and the services were Italian, many services. And then the processions, the annual processions with band leading, then the school, and then the societies. And then the people followed the procession through the main streets of Bristol, through Doran's Pond, Penn Street, Franklin Street, and then Wood Street to Lincoln Avenue, and then back to on Pond Street, then Logan Street by the school, and then back to the parish.
The Easter Tuesday procession through the streets from the Madonna della Grazie.
Dollars on the,
With the streaming dollar bills coming in at the end, and all the old women singing. I can still, when I think about it, I get chills up and down my spine.
I'm getting chills now. Okay, that's right. I can hear that Madonna della Grazie.
And the wonderful South Philadelphia band playing away.
After a sustained presence of more than a century, what unique imprint have these Italian Americans left on their town? And what have they become?
I think Italians, I think outsiders see this as maybe negatively, but we're not ashamed of kind of showing off what we have. And I don't say that in a negative way, showing off, but I don't think it's any coincidence that the two greatest pieces of art in town, two sculptures, are by an Italian, Mr. Pavone. That it took an Italian to come up with that, and they'll be here forever. And even if, you know, our neighborhoods are split up and we're not known as Italian Americans someday, an Italian's name will be on those two pieces of artwork. And I just don't think that's a coincidence that it was an Italian that did that.
I think of the Lions Club, I think of a diverse club, but predominantly Italian, I think. And what they've done in our Riverfront Park and the fundraising they do for the concerts in the park and the thousands of people that flock to that riverfront every summer, Sunday night for those concerts is quite a testimony to, I think, local pride and service to the community.
Their children and grandchildren have taken advantage of educational and employment opportunities of which the first immigrants would have never dreamed.
That's where things have changed, where, you know, there's much more opportunity. My son, hopefully when the time comes, will go to college and do whatever he wants to do. He's got more opportunity than my grandfather, obviously, or even my father had, to go on and be whatever he would want to be. And I guess there's some barriers there in some cases, but most of them are pretty well opened up where he can do anything he wants.
They were domestic engineers, and engineers they were to run the homes the way they did. And no, they probably never dreamt of being a part owner in a business as a female and running a home also, doing wearing two hats.
Will the forthcoming descendants of the immigrants preserve their ethnicity as they continue to intermarry and become more Americanized?
The worst events that could have happened to the Italian community was the death of the language, the death of the Italian language. That really cut off. I mean, we're probably all old enough to remember when Italian was used everywhere, in the stores or in the home, and certainly our children never hear Italian spoken. I mean, I speak Italian sometimes, the little bit that I remember, just to have fun and play with it. But it's not a daily, natural thing. And that cutoff point when the language died, really, so many traditions and things died along with it that I think our children are Italian in name only. The meanings, the feeling of it has gone.
There's a renewed emphasis on multiculturalism. There's a renewed emphasis on ethnic identity.
The sociologists talk about us being a great salad bowl now rather than a melting pot where the parts blend together nicely, but you can still pick out the individual components. I think that that statue that we put together, symbolic as it is, also will be the catalyst for this group, the Columbus group continuing, and some other groups perhaps springing up.
After all, we now realize that these first Italians, strangers in a strange land, overcame the obstacles of language, poverty, and prejudice. One commentator in 1906, writing in the Bucks County Gazette, said of them, "We believe these sun-kissed children from the vine-clad hills of Italy are a wonderful power for good in the making of our cosmopolitan American nation. They were more than nation builders. They were heroes. And heroes, and how much they mean to us, must never be forgotten."
Non ti scordar di